The doorbell rang just as I was setting the turkey on the table. Perfect timing, I thought. Everyone was finally seated. 12 of us crowded around the dining room table I'd spent all morning decorating. My daughter Jennifer and her family, my late husband's daughter Lisa with her kids, Robert's brother Tom, and his wife. The first real Thanksgiving I'd hosted since Robert died 2 years ago. I wiped my hands on my apron and headed to the front door, expecting a neighbor dropping off a dish, or maybe someone who'd gotten the address wrong. I opened the door to find my stepson Brian standing on my porch in a dark suit. Next to him stood a woman I didn't recognize, also in business attire, holding a leather briefcase. Brian hadn't been to Thanksgiving in 8 years. "Hello, Margaret," he said. His voice was flat, formal. "This is my attorney, Susan Cole. We need to serve you with some papers." My stomach dropped. "Brian?
Now?
It's Thanksgiving dinner. It's the only time I knew you'd be home and the family would be here." He looked past me into the house. They deserve to know the truth. Before I could respond, he walked past me into the dining room. The attorney followed. I stood frozen in my doorway, cold November air rushing in, not understanding what was happening. By the time I got to the dining room, everyone at the table had gone silent. Brian stood at the head of the table, Robert's old spot, and the attorney was pulling a thick manila envelope from her briefcase. She handed it to me. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Petition to contest will and claim undue influence. Brian's voice carried across the silent room. "I wanted you all to know the truth. She forged my father's will. The inheritance that should have been mine. She stole it all. If this sounds complicated, hit that like button because it gets so much worse. Drop a comment if you've ever had family turn a holiday into a nightmare. And subscribe. This story doesn't end the way anyone expected. Let me tell you how my perfect Thanksgiving dinner turned into a courtroom battle that tore my family apart, and why half of them still think Brian might be right. I married Robert Patterson 20 years ago. We were both in our late 40s, both coming out of difficult first marriages. Mine ended in divorce, his ended when his wife died of cancer. We were cautious at first, both of us carrying baggage and responsibilities. He had 2 adult children, Brian and Lisa. I had my daughter Jennifer. Blending families is never simple, but we tried. Those early years were good. Robert was steady, kind, successful in commercial real estate. He'd built a comfortable life for himself, and he welcomed me into it. I was working as a hospital administrator then, had my own career, my own retirement savings. We weren't combining finances out of desperation. We genuinely wanted to build a life together. His children were already grown when we married. Brian was 28, working in sales, newly married himself. Lisa was 25, pregnant with her first child. They'd lost their mother when they were teenagers, and I knew better than to try to replace her. I wasn't their mom. I was their father's wife. That was enough. Except it was never enough for Brian. He was polite to me, always polite. But there was a coldness underneath. At family dinners, he'd talk to his father, to Lisa, to my daughter, but his eyes would slide past me like I wasn't quite there. Robert noticed, but didn't push it. "He's still grieving his mother," he'd say. "Give him time." I gave him 20 years. Lisa was warmer. She invited me to baby showers, included me in family photos, called me on my birthday. She understood that loving her father didn't mean betraying her mother's memory. Brian never learned that lesson, but we functioned. We had Thanksgiving dinners with 15, 20 people. Christmas mornings with grandchildren tearing open presents. Summer barbecues where Robert would grill and everyone would laugh and swim in our pool. It wasn't perfect, but it was family. Robert and I had talked about the will many times over the years. He was practical about death, maybe because he'd lost his first wife so young. He'd always said the same thing. "When I die, everything goes to you first, Margaret. You'll need to be taken care of. Then when you die, whatever's left gets split equally among all the kids, Brian, Lisa, and Jennifer." It seemed fair. I never questioned it. Neither did anyone else. As far as I knew, 3 years ago, Robert started having trouble breathing. By the time they caught the lung cancer, it had already spread. The doctors gave him 6 to 12 months. He made it 8. Those 8 months were the hardest of my life. I took a leave from work to care for him at home for as long as possible. The hospice nurses came daily toward the end, but I was the one who sat with him through the night terrors, who helped him to the bathroom, who watched him disappear into pain and medication. Brian and Lisa visited at first. They'd come on weekends, sit with their father, hold his hand. But as Robert got worse, as he became less himself and more just a body fighting to breathe, the visits became shorter, less frequent. I understood. It's hard to watch someone you love die by inches. 2 months before Robert died, Brian came to the house wanting to discuss the estate. Robert was having a good day, relatively speaking. He was awake, lucid, able to have a conversation. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard their voices rising in the bedroom. "I just think we should talk about it, Dad. Make sure everything's clear." "Everything is clear." Robert's voice was firm despite his weakness. "Margaret will be taken care of. The will is done. But Dad, Lisa and I are your children. Your blood. Doesn't that count for something?" "Brian." Robert's voice went cold in a way I'd rarely heard. "My wife will be taken care of first. That's final. We're not discussing this again." Brian stormed past me in the kitchen without a word. I heard the front door slam. He didn't visit again until the funeral. Robert died in hospice on a Tuesday morning in October. I was holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you." I don't know if he meant me specifically, or if he was talking to everyone he'd ever loved. I chose to believe he meant me. The will reading was a week later. Robert's attorney read through the document in his quiet office while Brian, Lisa, Jennifer, and I sat in uncomfortable chairs. Everything came to me: the house, the investment accounts, the life insurance. Total value around $1.2 million. Brian and Lisa each received $25,000 and some specific items of their father's they'd requested. His watch for Brian, his mother's jewelry for Lisa. Brian's face went carefully blank as the attorney read. When it was over, he stood, shook the attorney's hand, and said, "Dad made his choice." Then he walked out of the office. I didn't hear from him again for 2 years, until he showed up at my Thanksgiving dinner with a lawyer and a lawsuit that claimed everything I had was stolen. The turkey was getting cold on the table, but nobody was eating. Everyone was staring at me, at Brian, at the papers in my trembling hands. Brian's attorney, Susan Cole, she'd said her name was, stood beside him with a kind of professional detachment that made this feel surreal. Like we were already in a courtroom instead of my dining room, surrounded by the smell of sage and roasted turkey and pumpkin pie. "What is this?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. Brian pulled another document from his briefcase. His hands were steady. Mine were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the lawsuit papers. "This," he said, holding up the document, "is my father's real will, dated 3 weeks before he died. It leaves 50% of the estate to you, 25% to me, and 25% to Lisa." I stared at the papers he was holding. They looked official, legal. There was a signature at the bottom that looked like Robert's. "I never saw that," I whispered. "Of course you didn't." Brian's voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Because you'd already convinced him to sign the one that cut his children out. But Dad had second thoughts. In his final weeks, he realized what you'd done. He wanted to make it right." My daughter Jennifer stood up, so fast her chair tipped backward. "That's insane. Mom would never, wouldn't she?" Brian turned to address the table, like he was giving a presentation. "My father was dying. He was on heavy medication. And your mother was the only one with him, day after day, controlling who visited, controlling what he knew, controlling everything." "That's not true." But even as I said it, I could see some faces at the table shifting. Uncertain, Lisa, Brian's sister, looked stricken. She was staring at her brother, like she'd never seen him before. "Brian, what are you doing?" "What I should have done 2 years ago." He gestured to the papers in my hand. "Dad left us almost nothing, Lisa. $25,000. After being his children for our entire lives. Don't you think that's strange? Don't you wonder if maybe he was influenced?" Robert's brother Tom cleared his throat. "Brian, your father made his choice. Robert and Margaret were married 20 years, and I was his son for 48 years. Brian's composure cracked slightly. His voice rose. Blood should count for something. He raised me. He was supposed to provide for me. Instead, she gets everything, and I get enough money to buy a used car. The attorney placed a hand on Brian's arm, a silent signal to calm down. She took over, her voice professionally neutral. Mr. Patterson's estate was valued at approximately $1.2 million. Mrs. Patterson received the entirety. In the will my client is presenting, she would have received $600,000. Mr. Patterson would have received $300,000, and Miss Patterson, she nodded to Lisa, would have received $300,000. We believe this reflects Mr. Patterson's true intentions. I found my voice, though it felt like I was speaking from underwater. Robert never said anything about changing the will.
We talked about it.
Many times. He was very clear about what he wanted. He changed his mind. Brian's eyes were hard. 3 weeks before he died, he signed this will. These witnesses, he pointed to signatures at the bottom, can testify that he was of sound mind and made this decision freely. I looked at the names. I didn't recognize either of them. M.Y.'s sister, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. She was an attorney, though not an estate attorney. May I see that? Brian hesitated, then handed her the document. She read it carefully, her face giving nothing away. This is properly formatted, she said quietly.
Notarized.
2 witnesses. If it's legitimate and dated after Margaret's will, it would supersede the earlier document. The room felt like it was tilting. I gripped the edge of the table. Jennifer moved to stand behind me, her hands on my shoulders. This is ridiculous. Dad was barely conscious 3 weeks before he died. He was in hospice. He had good days and bad days. Brian's voice softened slightly. On one of his good days, he asked to see his attorney. He told me he needed to fix things. That he'd been unfair. He told you this. I looked at him directly for the first time. When?
But I am at my eyes.
We talked. Before the end, he had regrets, Margaret. About a lot of things. Lisa stood up abruptly. Brian, I need to talk to you. In private. Now.
No.
Brian didn't look at his sister. I'm not hiding this anymore. I wanted everyone here to know the truth. She manipulated our father. She took what should have been ours. And I'm not going to let her get away with it. His teenage daughter, sitting next to her mother, started crying softly. The sound was awful in the silence. Brian's attorney spoke again. Mrs. Patterson, you'll be served formally with court papers within the week. We're requesting the court invalidate the will currently in probate and recognize this document as Mr. Patterson's true last will and testament. We're also pursuing claims of undue influence. Undue influence. I repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. My father would be ashamed of you. Brian's voice broke on the last word. He grabbed his briefcase. Come on, Susan. We're done here. They walked out. I heard the front door close with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. For a long moment, nobody at the table moved. The turkey sat in the center, forgotten. Steam had stopped rising from the serving dishes, then everyone started talking at once. Jennifer. Mom, this is insane. You can't let him. Uncle Tom. That boy has lost his mind. My sister. We need to get you a lawyer immediately. Lisa, still standing, voice shaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he was going to do this. I looked at her. Really looked at her. She was crying now, mascara running down her face. Did you know about that will? I asked quietly. She hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. He told me Dad had changed his mind. That there was another will. But I didn't think he'd. She gestured helplessly at the door where her brother had just left. I thought he was just angry. Still grieving. I didn't think he'd actually sue you. The room was spinning. I stood up carefully, like I was much older than 68, like my bones were made of glass. I need everyone to leave. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. I'm sorry. I can't do this right now. Mom, Jennifer started. Please. I looked at my daughter. I just need to think. They left slowly, reluctantly. Uncle Tom hugged me at the door. My sister pressed her business card into my hand, even though she'd given me her number 1,000 times.
Call me tonight.
We'll figure this out. Lisa was the last to leave. She stood in my doorway, coat on, looking like she wanted to say something. Do you believe him?
I asked.
Do you think I manipulated your father? She looked down. I don't know what to believe anymore. After she left, I closed the door and leaned against it. The house was silent except for the sound of my own breathing. I walked back to the dining room. The table was still set, food everywhere, like evidence of a celebration that never happened. I picked up the papers Brian had left. Read through them more carefully. The will looked real. Professional. All the right legal language. Robert's signature at the bottom, shaky but recognizable, dated 3 weeks before he died. 3 weeks before he died, Robert was in hospice.
He could barely speak.
Could barely squeeze my hand. Spent most of his time sleeping or crying out in pain from the morphine dreams. There was no way he'd signed a legal document. No way he'd been clear-headed enough to understand what he was signing. But the will looked real, which meant either I was losing my mind or Brian was lying. I went to my bedroom and pulled out the box I kept in my closet. Robert's medical records from those final months. I'd kept everything. Every hospital report, every medication log, every note from the hospice nurses. I spread them across my bed and started looking for the date on Brian's will. 3 weeks before Robert died. I found the hospice chart from that day. Patient sedated for pain management. Morphine 20 milligrams every 4 hours. Alert level, minimal. Unable to respond to verbal commands. Required assistance with all activities. I read it 3 times. Robert had been barely conscious that day. Couldn't respond to commands. Needed help with everything. And somehow, according to Brian, he'd signed a complex legal document. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, David. The man who'd handled Robert's estate, who'd known Robert for 30 years. IT rang 4 times before he answered. Margaret? Is everything okay? I need to see you.
Tomorrow.
First thing. My voice was shaking. Brian is contesting the will. A pause. I'll make time. Come at 8. After I hung up, I sat on my bed surrounded by medical records and tried to understand what was happening. Brian believed his father had left him more money. Had a document that looked legitimate. Was willing to destroy our family to get what he thought was his, and I had to prove that the will was a lie. I looked at Robert's signature on Brian's document. Compared it to the signature on a hospital form from the same week, a form I'd watched him sign, his hand shaking so badly I'd had to help guide it. The signatures were nothing alike. Brian's will showed a signature that was shaky but clear. Legible. Controlled. The hospital signature I'd witnessed was barely a scribble. Robert had been crying from the pain, could hardly hold the pen. Someone had forged that will. Had created a document that looked real, that had witnesses and a notary and all the right legal language, and Brian either knew it was fake and didn't care, or genuinely believed his father had signed it. I didn't know which possibility was worst. I went back to the dining room and started cleaning up. Wrapping food, washing dishes, putting away the good china I'd only used because I thought we were celebrating something. The first Thanksgiving without Robert. The first time I'd tried to bring everyone together, and Brian had turned it into a courtroom ambush. I wrapped the turkey in foil and put it in the refrigerator. Tomorrow I'd take it to the food bank. I couldn't look at it anymore. Tomorrow I'd figure out how to prove that Brian's will was a lie. Tonight, I just needed to survive the wreckage of the holiday I'd tried so hard to create. I was in David's office at 8 the next morning, still wearing yesterday's clothes. I hadn't slept. Just sat at my kitchen table all night with Robert's medical records spread out like evidence at a crime scene. David looked at both wills carefully, switching between them, comparing signatures. He'd been Robert's attorney for 30 years. If anyone could tell me the truth, it was him. Margaret, he said finally, if Brian's will is legitimate and dated after yours, it would supersede the earlier document. My stomach dropped. But it can't be legitimate. Look at the date. I pushed the hospice records across his desk. 3 weeks before Robert died, he was on 20 milligrams of morphine every 4 hours. The nurse's notes say he couldn't respond to verbal commands. He needed help with everything, eating, drinking, turning over in bed. David read through the records, his face grave. This is good. Very good. It establishes that Robert likely wasn't capable of executing a legal document. He looked up at me. But, Margaret, this will looks professional. The format is correct, it's properly witnessed and notarized. If Brian's attorney did their homework, this is going to be a fight. So what do? We build a case. Prove Robert wasn't mentally competent on this date. Get testimony from his doctors, his hospice nurses. Compare the signature to other documents from the same time period. He paused. And we need to find these witnesses.
Talk to them.
See what they actually remember. Over the next week, I became an investigator in my own life. I went through every piece of paper Robert had touched in his final months. Hospital admission forms, insurance papers, a birthday card he'd tried to sign for his granddaughter. The signatures told a story. In the early months of his illness, Robert's handwriting was still strong.
Clear.
As the cancer progressed and the medication increased, his signature deteriorated. By the final weeks, it was barely recognizable, shaky, incomplete, sometimes just a scribble. The signature on Brian's will didn't match. It was shaky, yes, but controlled. Legible. Like someone trying to forge a sick man's handwriting without making it too sick. I took everything to a forensic document examiner David recommended. She was a small woman with sharp eyes who'd testified in fraud cases for 20 years. She put Robert's real signatures under a microscope, measured pressure points and stroke patterns. Then she examined Brian's will. This signature was made by someone with motor control, she said, not looking up from her microscope. Your husband's genuine signatures from this time period show severe tremor, inconsistent pressure, incomplete letters. This, she tapped the will, shows deliberate shakiness, like someone trying to mimic impairment. So it's forged. I can testify that the signature is inconsistent with the other documents from the same time period. Whether that's forgery or whether he had an unusually good day, that's for the court to decide. But I knew Robert hadn't had any good days in those final weeks. I'd been there. I'd watched him disappear into the morphine fog, watched him cry out in pain, watched him slowly stop being himself. David hired an investigator to track down the witnesses listed on Brian's will. Two names I didn't recognize, Michael Stevens and Patricia Chin. The investigator came back 3 days later with his report. Michael Stevens worked at the law firm Brian had hired. Not as an attorney, as a paralegal in the estate planning department. He'd witnessed dozens of wills as part of his job. When the investigator interviewed him, Michael was uncomfortable. Said he witnessed so many documents he couldn't remember this specific one. But yes, he'd notarized it at the office. No, he'd never met Robert Patterson. The document had been brought to him already signed. He'd just witnessed the signatures that were already there. Patricia Chin was harder to find. The address listed on the will was an apartment building, but no one by that name lived there. The investigator finally tracked her to a different address across town. She was a notary who worked independently, notarizing documents for various law firms. When asked about Robert Patterson's will, she pulled out her logbook. I do remember this one, actually, she said, because the date in my log doesn't match the date on the will. I notarized it on a Thursday, but the will says it was signed on a Tuesday. I thought that was odd, but the attorney said the client had signed it at home and just needed the notarization backdated to match. The investigator recorded this conversation. Brought me the audio that I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot and listened to Patricia Chen's voice explaining how she'd notarized a will with the wrong date because an attorney told her. That's when I knew for certain. Brian's will was a fake. The question was whether Brian knew it was fake or whether someone had convinced him it was real. I wanted to believe he didn't know. That some lawyer had taken advantage of his grief and his anger, had created this document, and told him it was legitimate. That Brian genuinely believed his father had signed this will, but Brian had shown up at my Thanksgiving dinner with that lawyer. Had served me papers in front of my entire family. Had stood in my dining room and accused me of manipulation and theft. Even if he believed the will was real, he'd chosen to destroy our family to get what he wanted. My phone rang. It was Lisa, Brian's sister. I'd been avoiding her calls all week, I answered. Margaret. Her voice was thick, like she'd been crying. Can we talk? Please. I don't know what there is to say, Lisa. Brian really believes Dad wanted him to have more. He's not lying, he genuinely thinks. She stopped. He's been seeing a therapist.
Since Dad died.
He's got all this guilt about not visiting more at the end, about the fight they had. The therapist says he's looking for a way to fix things that can't be fixed. So, he's trying to fix his guilt by taking my home. I know it's not right. But Margaret, he's my brother. He's drowning in grief and debt, and he's convinced himself this is the answer. Her voice broke. I don't want to lose both of you. Isn't there some way to settle this? Give him something. Make this go away? I thought about it. I could write Brian a check for $100,000. $200,000. Make the lawsuit disappear. Preserve what was left of the family, but that would mean rewarding a lie. It would mean letting Brian believe that crying loud enough, threatening hard enough, disrupting Thanksgiving dinner dramatically enough would get him what he wanted. And more than that, it would mean disrespecting Robert's clear, documented wishes. Robert had been healthy and sound when he made his will. He'd thought about it carefully. He'd made his choice knowing exactly what he was doing. If I gave in now, I'd be saying Robert's choice didn't matter. That Brian's feelings mattered more than Robert's explicit instructions. No, I said to Lisa. I'm not settling. Robert made his wishes clear when he was healthy and confident. I'm going to honor that. Even if it destroys the family. Brian destroyed the family when he showed up at my house with a lawyer and a forged will. My voice was harder than I intended. I didn't do this, Lisa. He did. She was quiet for a long moment. I believe you, Margaret. About the will being fake. I do. But he's still my brother. I know. And that's why this is going to hurt. After I hung up, I sat in my car watching people carry groceries to their cars, living their normal lives, dealing with their normal problems that I called David. I want to fight this, I said. All the way. I want to prove that will is fraudulent, and I want it on record. Margaret, that means we'll have to prove Brian either forged it or knowingly used a forged document. That's a criminal allegation. I know what it means. It's going to get very ugly. Family testifying against family. Public court records. And even if you win, some people will always believe you manipulated Robert. I thought about Thanksgiving dinner. The cold turkey. The empty chairs. The family I tried to build, shattered across one evening. Robert trusted me to honor his wishes, I said. He was clear about what he wanted. I won't let Brian rewrite history because he's unhappy with his father's choice. Okay, David said. Then we go to court. I hung up and drove home to my empty house. The house Robert had loved, where we'd built 20 years of life together, where he died holding my hand. Brian wanted to take it from me, wanted to claim I'd stolen it, and I was going to have to prove, in front of a judge and my entire family, that I'd earned the right to live in my own home. Some nights I lay awake wondering if Robert would understand. If he'd approve of me fighting his son in court. If he'd want me to just give in, keep the peace, let Brian have what he thought he deserved. But Robert had made his choice. He told Brian directly, 2 months before he died, Margaret will be taken care of. That's final. I was just making sure his choice stood. Even if it cost me everything else, the courthouse was cold on the morning of the hearing. 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. 6 weeks of sleepless nights and forensic reports and depositions. I wore the navy suit Robert had always liked. Jennifer sat beside me, her hand tight around mine. David was on my other side with 2 bankers' boxes full of medical records and documents. Across the aisle, Brian sat with his attorney. He looked thinner than at Thanksgiving. Older. Lisa was beside him, and seeing her there, choosing her brother's side of the courtroom, felt like another small death. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain. She reviewed both wills silently for what felt like an hour. Brian's attorney went first. She painted a picture of a dying man who'd realized his mistake in the final weeks, who'd wanted to make things right with his children. She made it sound noble, redemptive. Then Brian took the stand. He talked about his father with genuine love. Childhood memories, fishing trips, the way Robert had taught him to tie a tie before his first job interview. His voice broke when he talked about the funeral. 3 weeks before he died, my father told me he was sorry, Brian said. looking at the judge. That he'd been thinking about the will, about what was fair. He said he needed to fix things. He called his attorney and had this will drawn up. I watched the judge's face. She was listening carefully, taking notes. David asked simple questions on cross-examination. Were you present when your father signed this document? No, but his attorney. Did you see your father sign it? No. What is the name of the attorney who prepared this will? Brian hesitated. Robert Fielding. And where can we find Mr. Fielding to testify? Longer pause. I don't know his current location. David nodded slowly. No further questions. Then it was our turn. The hospice nurse went first. Maria Santos brought her daily logs, her medication charts, her detailed notes. She read from her notes from the date in question without drama, just facts. Patient experiencing severe pain, medicated with morphine. Alert level minimal. Unable to follow simple commands. Required total care for all activities. No visitors except wife present 9 a.m. until 8 p.m. The judge asked directly. Could Mr. Patterson have understood and executed a legal document on this date? Maria looked uncomfortable, glanced at Brian, then back at the judge. No, Your Honor. Robert's oncologist testified next. Described the cancer progression, the increasing pain medication, the cognitive decline that happens when someone is actively dying. Mr. Patterson was transitioning to end-of-life care, the doctor said. His pain was uncontrolled. In my medical opinion, he would not have been capable of making complex legal decisions. The forensic document examiner showed both wills projected on screen, zoomed in on signatures. She explained the pressure points, the stroke patterns, how Robert's genuine signatures from that time showed severe motor impairment. This signature shows deliberate control, she said, pointing to Brian's will. The genuine signatures from within a week show none of that control. They're fundamentally different. She pulled up a birthday card Robert had tried to sign for his granddaughter 5 days before the will. His signature was barely a scribble, incomplete, trailing off the page. The signature on Brian's will was nothing like it. The witnesses from Brian's will both admitted they'd never met Robert. Had witnessed a signature that was already on the page. Couldn't say who'd actually signed it. The notary testified about the date discrepancy, how she'd been asked to backdate the notarization. Finally, I took the stand. I'd been dreading this moment for 6 weeks. Having to defend myself, defend my marriage, defend Robert's choices. David asked me to describe Robert's condition in those final weeks. I talked about the hospice bed in our living room, the medication schedule, the way he'd stopped being able to recognize people. How 3 weeks before he died, he could barely squeeze my hand. There were no visitors that day except Robert's brother for an hour in the afternoon, I said. Robert was asleep the entire time. No attorney visited. No one came to have him sign documents. Brian's attorney asked if I'd been controlling who could visit, if I'd kept Brian away from his father. No, I said firmly. Brian was welcome anytime. He chose not to come. Isn't it possible your husband signed this during a moment of clarity? I looked directly at her.
No.
I was aware of every moment. That's what caregivers do. When I stepped down, I looked at Brian. Really looked at him for the first time since Thanksgiving. He wasn't meeting my eyes. The judge didn't take long. I've reviewed all the evidence, she said. The medical records clearly establish that Robert Patterson was not capable of executing a legal document on the date in question. The forensic analysis of the signature raises serious questions about authenticity. The witnesses cannot testify that they saw your father sign the document. She looked directly at Brian. The will dated 6 weeks before Mr. Patterson's death is valid and shall stand. The petition to contest is denied. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of possible forgery. The gavel came down. IT was over. I in the courthouse hallway. I found myself face to face with Brian. His attorney had disappeared. Lisa stood a few feet away, crying quietly.
Why?
I asked him. Just that one word. Brian's eyes were red. He looked defeated in a way that went beyond losing the case. Because it's not fair. He was my father for 48 years, and you got everything after 20.
I didn't get everything, Brian.
I got what Robert wanted me to have. You don't need it all. His voice cracked. You have your own retirement. I have 3 kids in college and a mortgage I can barely afford. Your father thought about all of that. He made his choice.
Did he?
Or did you help him make it? And there it was. The real accusation underneath everything. I loved your father, I said quietly. I took care of him when he was dying. I held his hand when he took his last breath. And if you think I manipulated him, then you didn't know your father at all. Brian's face crumpled. I miss my dad.
I know.
I miss him too. But I can't forgive you for this. I know that too. He walked away down the courthouse corridor. Lisa lingered for a moment, torn between following her brother and staying with me. Go, I told her gently. He needs you more than I do right now. She hugged me quickly, then hurried after Brian. Jennifer appeared at my elbow. You won, Mom. I know. Then why do you look like you lost? I watched Brian and Lisa disappear around the corner. Thought about Thanksgiving dinners that would never happen again. About grandchildren who'd grow up with their families split down the middle. Because winning isn't the same as being whole, I said. David declined to have me press criminal charges. Said it would destroy what little was left of the family. The DA's office investigated, but without my cooperation as the victim, they couldn't build a case. Brian wouldn't be going to prison, but he did have to pay my legal fees. $32,000. I heard from Lisa later that he'd taken a second mortgage on his house to cover it. The will was settled. The house was mine. Everything Robert had left me remained mine. I'd won completely, and I'd lost my family in the process. Christmas came 5 weeks after the court ruling. I didn't host. Didn't even put up a tree. Jennifer invited me to her house, and I went because she insisted, but my heart wasn't in it. Lisa sent me a card. Not a Christmas card, just a regular card with a handwritten note inside. I'm sorry for doubting you. Brian was convincing, and I wanted to believe Dad had thought of us at the end. I should have known better. I hope someday you can forgive me. I read it 3 times and then put it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. An word from Brian. Not that I expected any. The court ruling had been clear and public. Brian's will was fraudulent. The signatures didn't match. The witnesses couldn't verify anything. Robert had been incapacitated on the date in question, but facts didn't change how Brian felt. To him, I'd still taken what should have been his. The court had just given me legal permission to do it. I updated my own will in January. Made it crystal clear. Everything to Jennifer, with specific bequests to my grandchildren. Named an independent executor, so no one could claim undue influence. Left detailed notes explaining every decision. I never wanted another family member to go through what I'd been through. Spring came. I went back to volunteering at the hospital. Started teaching financial literacy classes at the senior center again. Kept myself busy because empty hours meant too much time to think. In March, I got an email from Brian. The subject line just said, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for 20 minutes before opening it. The message was long. He talked about grief counseling, about realizing he'd been angry at his father for dying, for leaving him, for choosing me. About how he'd displaced all that anger onto me because I was still here and Robert wasn't. The therapist says I was trying to punish Dad for abandoning me, but since he was dead, I punished you instead, he wrote. I convinced myself that what was real because I needed it to be real. I needed to believe Dad had thought about me at the end, that I'd mattered to him. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't ask for money. Just said he understood now what he'd done was wrong. I destroyed our family because I couldn't accept that my father made a choice I didn't like. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for Thanksgiving. I'm sorry for all of it. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop. I didn't respond. Maybe I would someday. Maybe I wouldn't. The following Thanksgiving, I hosted again. Just 7 of us this time. Jennifer's family, my sister, and Lisa. She'd asked if she could come, and I'd said yes. We were both trying in our own way to salvage something. Brian wasn't there. His chair sat empty at the table and no one mentioned it. I carved the turkey and passed around the dishes and listened to my grandchildren talk about school and sports and their plans for the future. Normal conversation. Safe conversation, but I kept looking at that empty chair, and at the other empty chair, the one that had been Robert's. The one that started all of this. After everyone left, I cleaned up alone. Wrapped the leftover turkey, washed the dishes, put away the good china. My house was quiet. Too quiet. I kept everything Robert left me. The house, the money, the life insurance. All of it, exactly as he'd wanted. I'd won in court. Proven Brian's will was fake. Protected Robert's wishes and my own future. But the cost was higher than I'd imagined. Brian's children, my step-grandchildren, had grown up watching their fathers sue their step-grandmother. They'd seen their family torn apart over money and wills and accusations of manipulation. What would they remember about all this? Lisa still called me sometimes, but there was a carefulness in her voice that hadn't been there before. Like she was walking on ice, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Jennifer was angry on my behalf, which I appreciated, but she'd lost her step-siblings in the process. The blended family Robert and I had tried to build for 20 years had splintered into separate camps that I thought about Robert often. Wondered what he would have said about all this. Would he have told Brian to accept the will and move on? Would he have been disappointed in his son? Would he have been disappointed in me for not finding a way to keep the peace? Some nights I sat in the living room where Robert's hospice bed had been, where he'd died holding my hand, and I tried to remember his voice. The exact sound of it. The way he'd say my name. It was getting harder to remember. I'd protected his legacy, his wishes, his carefully planned estate. I'd honored everything he'd asked of me. But I couldn't help wondering, if Robert could see us now, his son estranged, his daughter caught in the middle, his grandchildren divided, would he think I'd made the right choice? Would he say the money was worth this? I didn't have an answer. Maybe I never would. All I knew was that I'd done what I thought was right. I'd stood up for Robert's choices when he couldn't stand up for them himself. I'd refused to let grief and guilt and family pressure rewrite his clearly stated wishes. I'd been legally right, morally right, factually right, and I'd never been more alone in my life. The house was mine. The inheritance was mine. The future Robert had planned for me was secure, but the family we'd built together? That was gone. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Some Thanksgivings can't be recreated. Some empty chairs stay empty forever. I turned off the lights and went to bed, knowing that next year there'd be another Thanksgiving, another empty chair, another reminder of what standing up for the truth had cost me. I'd do it all again. I had to believe that. But God, I wished it hadn't hurt so much.